Good morning guys, welcome to my unboxing and review of the high-grade HGGQ Gaia / Ortega's Rick Dom, which I'm probably just going to be calling the HGGQ Dom just for brevity's sake because, well, I don't think we're going to be getting a HGGQ just base Dom. I think only the Rick Dom was shown in the show. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but anyway, this is a 2025 standard release that I got on a sale for about $30. It retails for between $35 to $40, and as you can tell from this box barely fitting in frame, that is for good reason, because there is a lot more plastic in this box than your typical high grade on account of the sheer bulk of the Dom in conjunction with the kind of main thing that the HGGQ redesign of the Rick Dom changes, which is of course the addition of the third leg back there, which should add a considerable amount of plastic. So as many of you may know, I'm not the biggest fan of most one-year war era Zeon designs, but I do give a pass to the Ifrit and the Dom. I do really like how the original Dom / Rick Dom looks, and I do really like the redesign that HGGQ gave for it, mostly keeping the design intact while adding more, I guess, dominus to it, because one of its main unique things in Gundam proper is of course the hovercraft feet that it has, and in this case it adds a third one to give it a hover tripod for better stability and things like that, which is an interesting design, and I do like some of the weirdness that HGGQ is bringing to things, and since I like the design of the base Dom, I am glad that they didn't tweak it all too much as opposed to the regular design. Of course, getting to the box art here, this is in very typical HGGQ fashion, going to be in the typical high-grade painting style we've been seeing for a while, with a lot of metallic shine all over the Doms here on the box art, in addition to the cyberpunk color palette that HGGQ is going for with some digital distortions, like you can see the, I guess, like banding / distortion here around the beam saber, and of course the digital styling for the branding on this kit with the HGGQ logo there, the high-grade logo and the Bandai logo. So yeah, I do really like this box art, showing off both Gaia and Ortega's Rick Doms there. They're, as far as I can tell, they're basically identical units, and unlike the Rick Dom in Gundam proper, this kit is going to be coming with the giant bazooka and not the beam bazooka. So when I eventually take a look at the high-grade Dom test type from Gundam The Origin, I may end up building that as the ground version and swapping the bazooka in this kit with the beam bazooka from that kit, just because the Rick Dom feels just right with the beam bazooka. On the bottom of the box, we will of course be getting the painted build of the HGGQ Rick Dom here, and besides the giant booster on the back, this is looking like a pretty typical Rick Dom, and judging from like the molding on the red parts on the thrusters on the feet and everything, that looks like it might be color separated, which is a great thing, because going to this I was kind of expecting to have to do the tedious job of painting in all of the insides of the thrusters, but if it's color separated out of the box, that's pretty good for this kit. And of course showing off the articulation here with the Rick Dom swinging what in Gundam proper would normally be a heat saber, but here I think it's a beam saber just because of how green it is, but we will see. Of course, talking about the metallic coating for the verniers on the feet, so we will see if it's actual metallic coating, which would help justify the price quite a bit, or if it's just an injection silver. Of course, showing off the articulation of the thrusters here, showing off it standing on its tripod feet with the giant bazooka there, and then talking about the articulation gimmicks in the shoulders and torso, an open expressive left hand being included, and including parts to show it firing off the electromagnetic Haken. I thought it was just a taser wire, but that's a much more, I guess, ornate name for it. Showing off a hinge in the wrist to allow it to get more natural posing while holding the giant bazooka, as well as the, okay, so it is a heat saber, it's just green with this kit. And then talking about transforming the back of this kit in order to get it into high mobility mode, and then just showing off all the accessories that come with this kit. On this side, we will be getting the unpainted state right next to the painted state to advertise the color accuracy that this kit comes with. Of course, you can see right here, there are a couple of details that are going to be off, like these small rectangles on the lower torso need to be in a darker purple than what they come in on the kit. And then, of course, here we get the usual blurb about the HGGQ series in general. So getting right into it, inside the box, we will get 5 bags of runners, which does seem a little bit less than I was expecting given the size of the box, but I think a lot of that comes with just the giant size of the parts for the legs and the sheer amount of plastic that's required for it. Of course, we will also be getting this standard high-grade manual here with a cropped version of the box art, in addition to some information on the development of the HGGQ Rick Dom, as well as information on its pilots Gaia and Ortega. And then on the back here, we will be getting information on the armaments of the HGGQ Rick Dom here. Of course, talking about the giant bazooka, again, a little bit odd to me that the Rick Dom here is getting the giant bazooka instead of the beam bazooka. It, of course, has a diffuse or scattering beam cannon integrated into its chest. It will come with a heat saber, and then, of course, the electromagnetic Haken / taser wire. I think you'll be getting your color guide down here in full color in both English and Japanese. A lot more colors than your usual high grade. Oh, so there is a little bit of an insert in the manual here, the builder's note. I think just just advertising the Bandai Hobby website to talk about sharing your builds and talking about painting and things like that. And of course showing off their digital diorama tools and things like that, and their own like a box art creation thing, which is kind of cool if you're into that. Of course you'll be getting your parts list here in full color, fairly typical, pretty much what I would expect. A lot of these runners are going to be large just to accommodate the sheer size of the parts on them. Of course the first 2 pages of the build are going to be in color, starting with the head. This is pretty much what I would expect out of the Dom head here, and of course the mono eye is going to be on a ball joint to make full use of the cross-shaped mono eye rail that this design is supposed to use in universe. Of course then you start building up your torso. There's actually a surprising amount of inner frame here, a lot more than I was expecting, so it should build up quite nicely. Of course all these auxiliary joints should enhance articulation to be quite nice. Of course layering on some extra parts on top there, and then you move on to your arms. So the red undersides of the shoulder armor is going to be color separated, which is quite nice. Building up the actual arms themselves, like all of the other G-Quux kits I've taken a look at, this does look like it is going to be using a single joint for the elbow, but it should still allow for an okay range of elbow articulation. Then of course you assemble your upper body there, move on to your waist, which does look plenty more involved than the Gyan I took a look at last video. A lot more skirt armor and things going on here that should again help really bulk up the Dom quite a bit. And then you move on to the legs and backpack, which you are building 3 times instead of the usual 2, because well, this kit has a 3rd leg on the back. That's the main new thing that's different for the G-Quux redesign. So yeah, decent amount of layering here. I am interested to see if the red on the thrusters is recreated via part separation rather than painting, so we'll see that when I take a look at the runners themselves. Of course, do the same for all of the legs, fully assemble your kit there, and then attach the 3rd leg onto the back. Then you move on to your arsenal, including the giant bazooka, 2 heat sabers, and the electromagnetic Haken. The giant bazooka is just going to be pretty much 2 halves sandwiched together, a couple of parts for the handle, 1 for a secondary handle, and 1 for the end of the barrel. Then talking about articulating both the handle of the giant bazooka as well as the wrist of the Rick Dom, just to enhance posing and things like that. Talking about putting the heat saber into the hand, and then talking about replacing the hand parts to accommodate the taser wires. So yeah, a bit more part separation than I was expecting in the torso in particular, and hopefully that does indicate that this is going to be a robust build that will look really nice after everything's all put together. So inside the bags you'll be getting 12 runners, which again does seem about right for a design like this. Unfortunately, from what I saw from a cursory glance of the parts as I was taking them out, it does look like I am going to have to paint in the red insides of all of the thrusters, which I'm definitely not looking forward to. But of course, in addition to those runners, we'll be getting this fairly small marking decal sheet, just consisting of some small white accent parts for across this kit, mostly stripes, but also some little square parts over here. You'll be getting a metallic silver and red circle here for the diffuse beam cannon in the chest, and then you will be getting these 2 small red sensor stickers, presumably for, well, sensor details on this kit. And of course, we will also be getting this small wire here to show the kit using the electromagnetic Haken, so presumably you'll just be cutting this in half and then attaching it to the extra hand part that shows the 2, like, taser wires flying out of the knuckles. As for the runners themselves, these runners were printed in September of 2025, and I believe these are going to pretty much be all new for the G-Quux Rick Dom, apart from, of course, the runner for the heat saber blades. So runner A here is going to be a multicolor runner coming in 4 different colors. You get a navy blue here for some frame parts for all across the kit, including some frame parts that thrusters are going to attach into that I believe go into the waist, as well as some other accent parts over here. You will be getting a small red part over here that does look like it is a little bit like magenta tinted. It's not quite a full bright red, but of course this is mainly going to include the undersides of the shoulders to color separate those, as well as the red part for the Dom head. Unfortunately, this does not include any of the parts for the insides of the thrusters, so that you will need to paint in yourself. You do get a kind of like desaturated, like indigo-ish purple color here for some accent parts. For things like the arms, you get some, I think, power piping details over here, some access for, I think, like the knees over here, etc. And then you will, of course, get a single fluorescent clear pink piece for the mono eye. Runner B is also a multicolor runner, going to be coming in 3 different colors. We will be getting the typical Dom purple that we know and love down here, including parts for the lower torso over here, a number of accent parts, and I believe the backs of the hands over here. You will be getting the kind of like desaturated indigo-ish purple. I think it's the same as we saw on runner A here. Going to be a number of accent parts for the feet over here. You'll be getting your holding hands over here and open expressive hand over here. A number of parts for, I think, the ankles. You'll be getting your joints for the wrists over here, and then some accent parts over here. And then, of course, you will be getting some parts in a slightly purple tinted, very dark gray. For parts for the front of the chest, you will get a part for the diffuse beam cannon, and then you will get a part, I think, for the back. Runner C1 and C2 in a dark primer frame gray here. Going to be a number of frame and joint parts. seen all throughout the kit, with this middle part shared between the two of them, featuring frame parts for things like the waist, the head, etc. Runners D1 and D2 in a purple color here, going to be primarily parts for the feet. So you get parts for the two main legs over here, including parts for the upper thighs, and of course the giant feet and lower leg armor. And then you'll get a third duplicate part for the third foot that attaches onto the back. And then of course you get some parts here for the arms. Runners E1 and E2, and this, I think it's an injection silver. Yeah, you can see the kind of swirling in certain parts here. So this presumably is the metallic coating they were talking about that I think is just an injection silver here. Going to be parts primarily for the insides of the 3 feet, for all of the thruster and frame details that go inside the feet. Of course, you will need to be painting the insides in a bright red to make that color accurate, but this also includes some parts like the handles for the heat sabers, and of course the 2 actual parts for the electromagnetic Haken that you will attach onto the wire shown earlier. Runners F1 and F2 in this extremely dark navy blue, almost black color, containing a number of accent parts, including parts for the lower legs, and some other accent parts here that you will be attaching thrusters into. Runner G in what I think is a very slightly blue tinted primer frame gray, going to be all of the parts you will need for the giant bazooka. And lastly, you will be getting 2 of Runner SB18 here in green for the 2 heat saber blades. Again, it's a little bit weird to me that the heat sabers are in green instead of their usual orange or yellow, but it should help this kit stand out a bit when it's using the heat sabers. So yeah, all of those parts should be a pretty satisfying build, although a little bit tedious with all of the repainting you are going to have to do for the insides of the thrusters, in addition to some other small details, but I will see you after the build. Alright, welcome back. Here is the high-grade G-Quux Rick Dom snap-built, panel-lined, decaled up with the included sticker-style decals, and lightly painted. And yeah, I do really like how this kit looks. I am very much a fan of the G-Quux redesign of the Rick Dom. While I do like the Dom design from the original Mobile Suit Gundam, parts of it did seem a little bit awkward to me, and this kit does kind of rectify that a little bit, but I'll talk more about that later. So, getting right into the build, this kit is partially kind of in line with the rest of the G-Quux high grades, but also very much exceeding it in others. The large box size is for a good reason. Beyond the large size of some of the plastic parts, including the skirt armor and the huge lower leg armor, this kit also includes plenty of part separation, a lot more than I was expecting, especially in parts like the torso, where there is a frankly very impressive amount of inner frame present. There's a ton of part separation, partly because a lot of the frame in the torso is going to be visible if you have the third leg deployed down. A lot of that detail is going to be present. So you have a lot of geometric detail like crossbars and power piping and things like that that's visible within the frame. That's really cool. The frame layers on in a really nice way, especially with the chest. The way it layers on, it just looks like a big plate that's bolted onto the front of the Dom. I find pretty cool. You have parts separated layering in things like the knees. Of course, the thruster units in the undersides of each of the 3 feet also looks really impressive. All of the injection silver details being molded separately does look really great, although some detail is missing unless you paint in the insides of the thrusters in red, which we'll talk about more in the aesthetics section. But other separated parts that really impressed me include things like the insides of the elbows. The G-Quux Rick Dom has a color separated scheme where the middle part of the inner elbow joint is in purple and the parts around it is in navy blue. That's all part separated, which is really cool. Of course, the navy blue stripes that go on the front of the chest are part separated. Even things like the multiple tones of purple used are all part separated, which is really nice. The slight contrast between the purple and the blue purple, mostly being part separated, is a really nice touch that really helps this kit feel more premium and really helps it attempt to earn its price tag. But this is still a high grade at the end of the day. There are still plenty of missing inner frame parts. The inner frame for things like the arms and the legs are largely hollow, despite how nice the built-up torso frame is, and this kit is relatively quick to build. It will still take you longer than a typical high grade like the G-Quux Gyan that I took a look at last video, but you still can bang this out in a weekend depending on how long you have to build this kit. It is quite pleasant. The one major fit issue I will mention is of course going to be the red part in the head of the Dom. So the manual mentions that this red part is meant to be able to open up and easily be removed so you can articulate the mono inside, which is fine and all, except in my case, in my kit, being easily removable means that the red part just kind of falls out if the head is angled down a little bit too much. So depending on your pose, the red part might just not stick on and fall off. So that part I did end up plastic cementing in place, which isn't really a big deal because unlike some other Dom kits, there is no clear plastic between you and the mono eye, so you can very easily articulate it without removing the red piece, just using a pair of tweezers or something like that. So yeah, the red part in the head of my Dom was was quite loose, but apart from that, I didn't really notice any fit issues or stability issues while building the kit. Everything fits together quite nicely, everything feels very solid. Getting the Dom to balance is relatively easy given the large size of the feet, and overall the build is a step or two better than your typical GQuux high grade, being plenty involved, lots of involved inner frame in the torso, but feeling very much what you would expect out of this high grade line in the arms, and a little bit more than what's expected in the legs, especially with the thrusters all being part separated. It builds up quite nicely and does offset the tedium of building 3 legs instead of 2 a little bit. So yeah, I did really enjoy the build for the GQuux Dom. So coming back to its spinning in the booth, talking about aesthetics now, I will of course talk about color correcting stickers used in this kit, any details you will need to paint in yourself before I get into my opinions on this design. So of course I did end up using all of the color correcting stickers on this relatively small sticker sheet. Most of them are not necessary. I know a lot of the decals exist in Canon, but if you want to omit the white stripe details on this kit, you can and not really miss out on much. There are only 3 color correcting stickers I would consider necessary for color accuracy. The rest are bonuses in my opinion. So sticker 1 is of course going to be the silver and metallic red sticker here for the diffuse beam gun, or I don't remember exactly what it's called, the beam scatter gun, whatever it is that lets you flashbang people inside of the Rick Dom's chest here. Sticker 2 you get 2 of. They're going to be the metallic red rectangles there on either side of the waist for these, like, I don't know what they are, these like warning lights, hazard lights, something like that. And the rest are going to be the white stripe decal. Sticker 3 you get 3 of, 1 on each knee, so of course 2 on the front, 1 on the leg on the back for the small white stripe on the knees. Stickers 4 and 7 are going to be these 2 small rectangles that go here on either side of the waist armor. Sticker 6 you get 2 of. They're going to be the small white squares on the waist armor. Stickers 5, 8, 10, and 11 are going to be these small, like, kind of L white stripes that go around the outside of the skirt armor. And sticker 9 you get 2 of are going to be these small rectangles on the shoulders. So these white stripes actually do look pretty good. Very similar to something like the Police Zaku that I took a look at. The GQuux line does seem to be trying to minimize the borders around these stickers, and especially with these white stripes on dark plastic, not being able to see any kind of transparent border around these decals is really cool, and I really do hope this is a sign of things to come. And they integrate it in things like real grades where they very much minimize the border around these stickers so you can use them without it looking terrible. So now getting into the details I painted in myself, there are plenty of them unfortunately, despite again with how the GQuux line advertises itself as being very color accurate and looking great out of the box. There is still a lot you're going to need to paint in yourself if you want this kit to be color accurate. So in the head, this part is color accurate but didn't look quite great out of the box. The monoeye is a part separated piece coming molded in a soft clear either pink or red plastic. It was kind of hard to tell given the coloring and the translucency of it, but while it does look good, it does not reflect the light at all, and you can't really see it unless you're directly shining a light on it. So in my case, I painted over it using a fluorescent pink Gundam marker, and that does catch the light a lot better. In the lower torso then, this was shown off on the box, these small rectangles here in the lower torso. Well, it's built into the waist armor. The torso actually ends here, even though it looks like it extends down further, but those rectangles do need to be painted in yourself. They're just molded in the same shade of purple as the rest of the lower, or I guess upper waist armor there. It needs to be painted in the same shade as the blue purple seen here in the middle part. So I didn't have that shade, so I tried a couple of things. I ended up settling on using a dark gray undercoat and then painting high new purple over it, which doesn't quite match the shade, but it does separate it quite nicely, and I do think it looks good. And of course the highlights are painted in there using a pink undercoat and then a Display Mecha red marker. Of course, one of the big things you will need to paint in are going to be the thruster details, the insides of all of the thrusters here on each of the main feet, on the back foot here, and then of course on these auxiliary thruster pods on the waist. The insides of those thrusters all need to be painted in red. I used a few coats of Display's Mecha red paint marker, and it did end up turning out pretty good. And I do really recommend you paint these in, just help color separate them and really enhance the detail in the injection silver parts in the feet just by giving it a little bit of contrast. If it's all silver, the details are kind of less apparent and harder to pick out. Contrasting it with the red like this, it really does help enhance all of the detail molded into this framework thing and helps it look great. And the other main thing on this mobile suit I painted in are of course going to be in the feet. So I didn't actually notice this until the kit was fully assembled, which is a little bit annoying because the feet are hard to get out. And I had heard the ball joint going into the leg, because it's in that injection silver, like kind of swirly plastic, it is more brittle than normal plastic, so removing the feet does pose a risk of breaking the joint connecting it into the leg. So yeah, be very careful and make sure to paint this in before you fully assemble the kit, because the gray parts in the feet do need to be painted in yourself. I used a Display gray paint marker, and yeah, the entire foot is molded in that slightly blue tinted black color, and the only parts that are actually in that color in the foot are of course this big section in the front and these like treads or tracks or something on the sides of the feet. The rest of it need to be in a light gray. So yeah, it was a little bit scary to work with just because I was worried about breaking the joint, but And of course, the entire heel piece here also needs to be in that lighter gray color. So while that's everything I need to paint it on the Dom, that isn't everything I painted it in this kit in general. For the giant bazooka here, also in that same Disbay gray marker and that lighter tone of gray, there is a little bit of contrast in here with these small, like, I guess, bar details wrapping around the giant bazooka needing to be painted in a lighter gray. So again, use Disbay's gray paint marker for that. So yeah, these details here, this like little band wrapping around the scope there, these details near the front of the barrel, this bar hanging down from the front of the barrel, and of course this small bar wrapping around the trigger guard here needs to be painted in a lighter gray. And the front of the scope here needs to be painted in blue. The promotional material shows off a kind of like matte blue color. I ended up using a metallic cyan that I think looks pretty good. And the other thing I painted in, which is color accurate, but I didn't like how it looked, is of course the heat saber. So as it spins around, you'll notice that the heat saber does look a little bit awkward because it is in green. These Dom heat sabers are normally typically in a brighter orange-yellow color, and having it be in green here combined with the more ornate injection silver handle here just makes it look like a budget lightsaber to me, which looks pretty bad. So for the other heat saber, I did end up painting it using a mix of metallic orange and metallic yellow, and I do really like how this one looks. So this is the heat saber I'm going to be using in the posing section. You'll just be seeing the green one here as it spins around just to see what it looks like without doing any kind of painting. And while this kit does have the holders to use both beam sabers, the manual says, depending on whether you're building this as Gaia or Ortega's unit, it will either have one beam saber on the right rack or no beam sabers, but you can just mount both of them if you want. And the line art on the Gundam wiki and things like that do show the Rick Dom having both heat sabers mounted. So not really a big deal, but just a odd quirk that the manual points out. So getting my opinions on this design, I do really like the GQuX redesign of the Rick Dom here. I did take a look at the original design of the Rick Dom just for a quick comparison, and in my opinion, it does look a little bit more awkward, particularly in the head. The way the shoulders of the original Rick Dom kind of shrug a little bit to form one congruous shape with the head is a little bit odd to me. Although in general, I do like the design overall. Having the head be more of a separate piece in the GQuX Rick Dom really helps kind of set it apart and make the mobile suit look a little bit more distinct and less awkward in my opinion. While the third foot mounted up on the back here does look a little bit awkward, having it like kind of swing down and look more stable as the Dom is charging forward on the ground does look really great in my opinion. Having it look a little bit awkward as essentially a giant booster pack on the back right now is a fine trade-off for me. Although I do find the extra boosters mounted on the waist to be a little bit overkill. I do get that this thing's whole shtick is having a ton of thrusters for a ton of high-speed maneuvering in space, but these extra thruster units on the waist just seem a little bit awkward. But in general, I do really like how this kit looks, especially in the torso, with the way the front armor piece is like separated out as a separated plate. The color-separated red part underneath the shoulder looks really great. The splashes of silver in this kit, in things like the heat saber holders there, of course, the scaffolding in the bottoms of the feet, the small bits of the thrusters poking out of the sides of these thruster pods in the waist all look really good, and I do in general very much appreciate the multi-tone color scheme they're going with in this kit, with the multiple tones of purple contrasting with the black and gray very nicely. So yeah, in general, I really do like the more premium high-grade feel of this kit, the many tones of colors that are seen throughout the kit, the way everything builds up, and the way it remixes the normal Rick Dom in a subtle but distinct way that really kind of enhances what I liked about the original Rick Dom, while eschewing some of the parts that I found to be a little bit awkward. So yeah, very much a big fan of this redesign. So of course, for a quick size comparison, here's the high-grade GQuX Rick Dom next to a standard-sized high-grade being the high-grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. So as you can see, the Rick Dom here being, I think, a 20-meter tall suit in universe is going to stand significantly taller than your average high-grade, and being significantly more bulky than your average high-grade, this will take up a ton more width-wise space on your shelf and depth-wise space on your shelf, and you will need more shelf surface area to even get this kit balanced in the first place if you're articulating the third leg down, just because it takes up more surface area on the ground. So yeah, this kit will take up a ton of space on your shelf, especially if it's holding the giant bazooka, which you'll see in a moment. That weapon is, well, as its name implies, absolutely huge. So yeah, make sure to allocate a significant amount of space on your shelf for this high grade compared to your typical high grade. So for your accessories, here's the high-grade GQuX Rick Dom with everything it comes with, and this is a fairly complete accessory spread. Again, even though it wasn't shown off for the show, I do wish this would have come with a beam bazooka, because I was a little bit mistaken in the unboxing section. While most Rick Doms were not equipped with the beam bazooka, anytime the beam bazooka was deployed, it was on a Rick Dom. So I do feel like it is kind of like the signature weapon of the Rick Dom, and I do wish a version of it would have been included. But getting into your hand options as per usual, you will of course get the two standard high-grade holding hands you see on the kit right now for use with either the the heat sabers or the giant bazooka. You will of course get this open expressive hand only on the left side to enhance certain poses, and you will get this back of the hand only for the left fist. I took a look at it and this will not go on the open expressive hand. This only goes on the left standard holding hand. This is of course the back of the hand you are going to be using when you are deploying the electromagnetic Hawkins / the taser wire. The main difference of course is that it is elevated a little bit and you have these two holes here to attach the wires. Speaking of which, you of course saw the yellow wire in the unboxing that the manual tells you to cut in half to deploy both of the electromagnetic Hawkins. And then of course, when you have the wires deployed, you will attach these anchor things at the end here for the Hawkins that are intended to kind of anchor themselves into a mobile suit and electrocute it, which is kind of a cool option for the Dom. For your melee options, you will of course get 2 heat sabers in this kit. The manual says you have 1 spare, but you can of course mount the second one on the other heat saber rack on the left shoulder there if you want. It comes molded in this green color, which like I mentioned earlier, just makes it look like a budget lightsaber combined with this handle that does not look very good or unique in my opinion, and I would recommend you paint it in a metallic yellow-orange like I did. I very much like the look of the painted heat saber a lot more, and I will end up using this in the posing section instead of that green one. And of course, the main weapon of the HGGQ Rick Dom is the giant bazooka, which is significantly more giant than the normal giant bazooka. So let me get my comparison over here. So here is the high-grade Ifrit Schneid Unicorn version with its very normal giant bazooka, and as you can see, the HGGQ version is significantly larger. It's maybe like 15% longer than the normal giant bazooka and significantly like longer in the back with the magazine. So yeah, this giant bazooka, much larger than what you would expect if you've built any other kit that uses the giant bazooka in like normal UC and things like that. So yeah, this is of course a very large impressive weapon, is the main weapon of the Rick Dom, and probably what you're going to end up posing it with on the shelf, just to really bring out the best of what the Rick Dom is capable of. There are several points of articulation in this giant bazooka here. The scope does not move, of course, but the handle can articulate down for more natural posing over the shoulder. And of course, you have a secondary handle here that can flip to either side. The Rick Dom is ambidextrous. It can wield any of its weapons on either side. Well, apart from the electromagnetic Hawkins, which is only for the left side, but all of its handheld weapons you can wield on either side, no problem. So yeah, that is a fairly complete accessory spread for the Rick Dom with everything it was shown using in the show. Again, do wish for an extra goodie, they would have included the beam bazooka, but it really was needed to give it the complete arsenal as it was shown in the show. So getting into articulation now, starting as per usual with the head. For an upward look, you can get a slight upward look, even though this Dom head is small and flat and kind of recessed here in the collar. It is on a double ball joint. That does allow it a bit of articulation. For a downward look, yeah, you don't get all that much before the red part of the head will collide with this plate in the torso armor. You get basically no tilt from side to side, as you might imagine, with a head as kind of shallow as this, and you cannot 360 the head. The most you can get is almost a 45-degree tilt to either side. The mono eye is going to be on a ball joint, and again, the manual tells you to remove the red part, but I plastic cemented mine in place just because it was falling off so often. So you can just use a pair of tweezers here to move the eye around. It is on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things, so yeah, it can go to either side. It can go up or down as necessary. So yeah, you can move the eye however which way you want, using a pair of tweezers. In the shoulders then, the entire shoulder assembly in the torso can swing forward, although not very far before it collides with that very thick torso armor here. So at most, you will get maybe 15 to 20 degrees of shoulder swing, not very good. Although, given this mobile suit's proclivities towards using the giant bazooka primarily, that's not really the biggest deal in the world to me. While the shoulder can 360 in its socket, you are blocked by the heat saber holder here, so realistically at most you will get about 180 degrees, which should be more than what you need for rotation in this kit. The assembly can also tilt upwards independently slightly to facilitate about a 90-degree side raise, and as you can see, the armor can fold downwards if you would want, but I do think the shoulder armor looks better being a single continuous shape with the part here in the torso. You do of course get full rotation in the upper bicep. A single joint in the elbow will give you almost a 135-degree bend before the forearm armor here will collide with the upper bicep. And the wrist is on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things. In addition to a slight hinge, very similar to the HGGQ Gyan, although not quite as extreme, will allow the wrist to tilt like so, for use with either thrusting attacks with the heat saber, or more importantly, for better articulating the giant bazooka over the shoulder without it colliding with things or looking awkward. In the torso then, for a forward ab crunch, you get a minor forward ab crunch. For a backwards ab crunch, you do get a fairly impressive backwards ab crunch, which I thought might be an issue with the third foot mounted on this thing's back, but it's not really that big a deal because the third foot actually attaches into the waist instead of the torso. This kit doesn't have any issues with the torso drooping backwards, so yeah, very smart bit of design here, attaching it into the waist rather than the torso as a backpack, just so this kit doesn't tip backwards constantly. You do get some fairly nice side to side tilt. You cannot 360 the torso because of all this stuff going on to accommodate the third leg. So at most you will get about a maybe 30-degree tilt to either side. These heat saber racks are not articulatable. There's a little bit of play in how they connect. They're a little bit loose, but apart from that, they don't really articulate. They're not really in danger of falling off or anything like that. Of course, in the back here with this third leg, this is with the knee fully bent, so you can, of course, tilt the leg back like so if you're using it like a booster pack just to show this kit charging through space at full speed. Of course, this hinge here can swing down for when you're articulating the third leg actually deployed on the ground. In the waist then, this skirt armor can rotate, although the rotation is mostly for use when you're actually assembling the kit. When you're attaching the legs and things like that, this will move out of the way to give clearance. Because apart from that, there isn't really a reason to articulate the skirt armor all that much, especially with these cutouts here for when you're having the Dom deploying its third leg. You're going to need to swing these other legs out a little bit, so that's why this cutout is here, and means you don't really need to articulate the skirt armor. These booster pods in the back can rotate, and it will swing back and collide with the leg, which is why you kind of need to swing it out of the way if you want to articulate these booster pods backwards. But they can also, of course, swing down like so when they're not in use. In the main legs, then, there is no hip drop or hip swing mechanism, so for front kicks, if you articulate the leg into the cutout, at most you will get just under 90 degrees. For side raises, you will also get at most about 75 degrees. And for back kicks, you will also get about 75 degrees. So ironically, the Dom here actually has better kick articulation overall than the G-Quux Gyan, which is a melee focus suit, which retroactively makes my articulation disappointment in that kit just a little bit more tangible. In the knees, then, a single joint in the knee will only give you about a 90-degree bend, as you would expect, given the very thick lower leg armor here colliding with the thigh. There is also a bit of an armor separation gimmick, with this small plate in the back of the knee retracting as you articulate the knee, which is cool. The ankle armor is just molded into the lower leg armor, so there's no articulation in that to speak of. In the feet, then, each of the feet are on a ball joint, but given how shallow they are in the socket, your feet don't have all that much articulation. So vertical toe raises, you get a minor toe raise. There is a tiny bit of heel-toe separation, as you can see. It doesn't really enhance the articulation all that much. You do get a very minor toe dip. You get very little side to side, and you get almost no rotation. So yeah, the foot articulation is a little bit disappointing, but again, not really that big of a deal given how large they are. This kit doesn't really have that big of an issue balancing. I just like to make sure the kit isn't leaning backwards all that much overall, and especially with the third leg deployed, there should not be really any issue with the feet preventing articulation. Don't expect this to hit a one-legged running and gunning pose, but apart from that, the articulation should allow this kit to hit most of the poses you would want it to. Speaking of which, let's get this kit in some poses. So getting the high-grade G-Quux Rick Dom into a spin, starting with the usual, well, kind of running and gunning pose. As you might imagine, this thing was not going to be hitting a one-legged running and gunning pose, even with the third leg kind of propped up on the back, because of the very poor ankle articulation, even with how large the surface area of the feet is. So here it is with the third leg down. The Dom is conveying that it is kind of charging to one direction, while it is kind of repositioning, about to grip the giant bazooka with two hands to shoot at someone. So this demonstrates a few things. One, the kit does look pretty good with the third leg down, but just having the leg down doesn't really convey a sense of motion. You need to do a lot of articulation work on the torso and the thrusters on the sides of the waist in order to subtly imply the movement, because I was originally going to have this kit kind of leaning in one direction, putting more weight on one leg with the other two more extended out, but it's kind of hard to get the legs to cooperate just because of how bad the ankle articulation is, because of how shallow the ball joint is within its socket. So yeah, it is a little bit difficult to actually convey that motion, but the torso has solid enough articulation that it is fairly easy to get that kind of subtle kind of implication of motion without explicitly demonstrating it, and having it in this kind of relocating pose as it is like kind of reaching mid-motion to get the giant bazooka into firing position is pretty cool. And as you'll see later, the third leg being down isn't just for articulating motion, it's also decent for articulating the power of the giant bazooka. Like, it needs to deploy its third leg in order to stabilize it to actually handle the power of the giant bazooka, which is a pretty cool way to display the kit. So yeah, having the third leg down like this is a pretty interesting way to display the G-Quux Rick Dom, and is something I would recommend you do on your shelf. So getting the kit into a kneeling pose with the third leg up here, here it is firing the giant bazooka two-handed, posed as if it's like on the edge of a cliff or something, and firing the giant bazooka down at a target. So this demonstrates a few things. One, I am very surprised this thing could even hit a kneeling pose to begin with. I thought the balance was going to be very off with that third leg right there, and especially having it up on the back like this, I thought it was going to tip over. It turns out, no, it does not, but this doesn't look particularly natural. While the front leg does actually look fine, the back leg kind of floating off the ground like that does kind of take me out of the realism of the pose. if you set this up in a diorama or something where the back leg could be resting on a rock or something like that, or some kind of elevated surface to make it not float off the ground, this pose could be pretty interesting, but as it is now just kind of on flat ground without any kind of diorama or modification or anything, it does look fairly awkward. But the Rick Dom does look pretty good in a pose similar to this, whereas kind of preparatory, again, it is emphasizing the heft of the giant bazooka, where it needs to take this very stable, grounded pose in order to fire it, which is what I was talking about earlier with using the third leg as a means to convey the power of the weapon rather than high-speed mobility. So that aspect of this pose looks good. The Dom actually wielding the giant bazooka two-handed does look good, although you may notice the heat saber is missing off the shoulder racks. That's because, well, it is very annoying to get the giant bazooka into position with the heat saber in place, and remounting the heat saber back on is a little bit annoying with the giant bazooka there. So in other poses you'll see with the giant bazooka, the heat saber will either be mounted on the left shoulder rack or gone altogether, just because it is kind of a pain to get it repositioned with the giant bazooka in posing. So yeah, the Rick Dom does look pretty good with the giant bazooka two-handed. It looks good in preparatory poses that emphasizes the weapon's power, not necessarily in a kneeling pose like this, without modifying its environment to make it look a little bit more natural. So getting the Dom into the air, here it is kind of charging forward with the giant bazooka in one arm, firing off the electromagnetic Haken with the other. So this demonstrates a few things. Well, you also see it in some more poses later on, but there are many ways to pose the Dom in midair. Either wielding the giant bazooka two-handed with the heat saber, you can actually even deploy the third leg down and have all three kind of thruster feet aligned in the same direction to demonstrate extreme high-speed mobility, which you'll see later in the conclusion section. Or you can pose it doing something like this, where it's relocating while firing off the electromagnetic Haken. So this does demonstrate a few things. One, despite its size and bulk, the Rick Dom does balance fine on any stand for 1/44th scale Gunpla. This Action Base 7 does hold it up just fine, although the actual adapter part did want to tip forwards. I did have to adjust this stand quite a bit in order to get it balanced like this. The electromagnetic Haken is an interesting weapon to have. Having this taser wire come out of the Dom's knuckles is kind of interesting, but other than poses like this, I don't think it works all that well as a weapon, and I think it's less interesting and has less impact on your shelf than displaying it with using the giant bazooka or the heat saber as its main weapon. So yeah, while I'm glad it was included for completion's sake, and you can get a fairly dynamic pose in this kind of aerial pose off where it's relocating while firing off to the side, it isn't the most interesting thing to pose the Dom doing. But the Rick Dom does look pretty good in the air here. So if you're going to pose it not having the third leg down on the ground, posing in the air is definitely a valid option. It is still a Rick Dom at the end of the day. It is a space-use mobile suit, and all those thrusters really do help convey its mobility in a zero-G environment. And if you tilt the third leg up like that, you really can convey the forward motion going forward. It is very shocking to me just how much more dynamic the Dom looks in poses than the Gyan I took a look at last video. It seems very counterintuitive, but the Dom does look extremely dynamic in these kinds of aerial relocation poses, and yeah, if you're not going to pose it with the third leg down on the ground, this is definitely how I would recommend you pose this kit on the shelf. Maybe with a different weapon, not the taser wire. So, getting into a spin here, it is about to deliver a slash with the heat saber downwards, and this demonstrates a few things. While the legs can look fairly dynamic in charging poses, the arms don't necessarily look the most dynamic doing melee poses. And you'll also notice this in the promo material and things like that. They have, I think, a single melee pose with the heat saber, and it does not look very good. So, yeah. The heat saber, while it is cool to have and it's very nice to have for completion's sake, I really wouldn't recommend using it as the main weapon. You'll see it in a pose kind of charging forward with three legs on the ground later using the heat saber as a weapon. Also doesn't look particularly good there. So, well, I would recommend you repaint the heat saber in a metallic yellow-orange just to help it look a little bit better. I would also recommend just kind of either keeping it in the offhand or keeping it on the back, because using it as the main weapon isn't really playing the best to the Rick Dom's strengths. So I'll leave this up while I get into the conclusion. So in conclusion, the high-grade G-Quix Rick Dom is a very great representation of this redesign of the Rick Dom of the G-Quix universe, recreating its main gimmick of having a giant third leg mounted on its back. That looks great, whether mounted on the back or on the ground. It does come with a complete arsenal of a giant bazooka, heat saber, electromagnetic Haken, and an open expressive hand, and demonstrates surprising poseability for its bulk and size. So the build for this kit is more involved than your typical high-grade G-Quix kit. It is a very pleasant build with a lot more involvement in building up the inner frame, particularly in the torso, because of how much of the frame is exposed when you drop the third leg down to articulate in certain ground poses. They did have to mold in a ton of detail on the inner frame. There's a lot of surface detail and geometric detail in things like crossbars and structural details like that that are visible in the back once you drop the third leg, which is really cool and really helps this build feel a lot more premium, and in addition to the sheer amount of plastic in the box, also helps justify the premium price tag this kit comes in. So yeah, the build is incredibly pleasant. The only real fit issue I will mention is of course going to be in the red part in the head. It is designed to be able to flip up easily so you can articulate the mono eye, but in my case, the red part would just fall off the head if it was tilted down a little bit too far. So yeah, that part I would recommend you just either glue or plastic cement into place, because you can articulate the mono eye very easily just with a pair of tweezers with the red part still on. So yeah, apart from the red part, the build is very pleasant overall. In terms of aesthetics then, the Rick Dom is a lot more normal than a lot of the G-Quux redesigns. This kit redesigns the normal Rick Dom in a very kind of subtle way, with of course the big thing being the giant third leg on the back, but apart from that, this Dom could be mistaken for a Rick Dom by people who aren't like super familiar with the design and are just kind of passingly knowledgeable on what the Dom looks like. A lot of this kit's redesigns come in small geometric details sticking up out of the shoulder, the small details sticking up out of the waist with the like kind of warning lights or something like that on it. The diffused beam cannon looks a little bit different. The geometry of the chest is different, with there being a giant plate on the chest rather than the more, I guess, seamless integrated design of the normal Rick Dom. Of course, the waist armor is different. The feet themselves are rather different, composing of this like metallic silver framework with a bunch of thrusters in them rather than more normal mobile suit feet that just happen to have big thrusters integrated inside. But yeah, I do really like this more subtle G-Quux redesign rather than the very overt ones that we've been seeing in the past, with things of course like the Gyan, the Zaku, and the Gundam. But this kit will require a fair amount of painting in order to make entirely color accurate. All of the thrusters in the feet and on the units on the waist do need to have the insides painted in red, which was a little bit tedious, but not quite as annoying in my opinion as needing to paint in the giant gray details in the feet. There's a relatively large amount of surface detail you will need to paint in. The feet are entirely molded in a slightly blue tinted black. You'll need to paint the vast majority of it in a lighter gray. You will also need to paint in some details on the giant bazooka in a lighter gray. You need to paint in the scope on the giant bazooka in blue, and there are some small box details on the upper waist / lower torso that need to be painted in a blue-purple with a little red accent on them for some contrast. I ended up using a darker purple, which also creates that contrast effect quite nicely, but isn't necessarily accurate. You may also want to paint in the mono eye in a fluorescent pink to help it pop, because the mono eye is molded in a translucent, clear, soft plastic, which doesn't necessarily catch the light all that well, and if you don't like the heat saber being green, like I do, then you may want to paint that in a metallic yellow-orange. So yeah, there's a fair amount of painting you will need to do to make the Dom color accurate, but on the color correcting sticker front, they are improving on their color correcting stickers, where the stripes have pretty much no border around them, so they do look actually very good on the dark plastic that they go on. So yeah, I don't really see the need to get the official replacement water slides for this kit. If you want to get decals from like G-Rework or Delphi that add a bunch more details to this kit, I think that would be a fine idea, but just getting the official ones that just replace the sticker sheet with water slides is very unnecessary in my opinion, given how good these sticker style decals actually do look on the kit. In terms of accessories, this kit comes with pretty much everything you would expect it to, with the very impressive giant bazooka, a heat saber, the wires and anchors for the electromagnetic Haken, a hand part for the electromagnetic Haken, and of course an open expressive hand. Really the only things I would say this kit are missing are duplicate hand option parts and extra hand option parts to help this kit have more variety in posing, and it would have been nice for this kit to come with the beam bazooka, but I understand why it didn't. It wasn't shown with the beam bazooka in show, I don't believe, so yeah, it is fine for it to be omitted from this kit, but it does feel a little bit incomplete because, well, yeah, the Rick Dom and the beam bazooka just kind of go together in my mind. In terms of articulation, this is where this kit actually really did surprise me, being better at articulating than the Gyan that I took a look at last video. The legs in particular do demonstrate a surprising amount of articulation ability given their size and bulk, partially to facilitate being able to like kind of drop the legs in order to facilitate the 3-leg gimmick, but the upper body also does possess a very respectable amount of articulation that can compensate for any shortcomings in the bulk of the design. The torso is able to articulate in surprisingly nuanced ways that do allow you to convey motion in the 3-legged form without needing to do anything particularly extreme. The subtle implication of motion in the upper body is enough to convey that motion surprisingly convincingly, and does allow for a wide variety of posing in this kit. Certain options, like as you might expect, like the torso and head articulation, are a little bit lacking, but that was kind of be to expected with a design as bulky as the Doms. So yeah, this kit does possess a surprising amount of articulation for its size and does allow for a wide variety of posing. So would I recommend this kit? Yes. Unless you hate the design of the Dom, I would absolutely recommend you pick this up. Maybe wait for a sale. I know Black Friday is coming up, but this kit on a sale is definitely worth the price. For its base price of $35 to $40, it is a bit steep for a high grade, but I think it does justify that price with what it offers in the box, coming with a very respectable amount of plastic, of course, given the very bulky size of the legs, and including a third leg. This kit was always going to be coming with a large amount of plastic, but This kit also has a very nice involved build, especially in the torso to help justify that price. It is fairly feature complete in terms of accessories. It performs great in terms of articulation. The color correcting paint required to make this kit color accurate is a little bit annoying, but is far from unacceptable in my opinion. So yeah, this is an excellent redesign to the standard Rick Dom, and this model kit does definitely do the design justice and provides a lot more variety, especially in posing, than I was expecting. So yeah, this is an excellent model kit and an excellent addition to any collection. So that was my review of the high-grade HGGQ Rick Dom. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub to notification list on this future uploads. If you like this video, give it a like. And I'll see you next time with the winner of the poll I put up on my channel, I think last week by the time this video comes out, which looks like it is going to be the high-grade 00 Gyan flag, which I'm very much looking forward to. I was very surprised to hear that that kit was a thing, and it isn't just reusing parts from like 15-plus-year-old flag kits. It is apparently an entirely new mold. It does include a runner that has like a universal runner label or a generic runner label or something like that, which does give hope that we are going to be getting either a line of high-grade 00 revive kits, or at least some more flags that we didn't see in the line before. So yeah, very excited to take a look at that kit. Very much looking forward to all of the new molding and all of the tech improvements that kit's going to get over the high-grade 00 releases from like 15 to 18 years ago at this point. So yeah, very much looking forward to that kit, and I'll see you then.